Hi everyone, welcome to Moms Who Code video guide session. In this video, we're going to build our first foundation service to save the module that we have been working on. Just to recap whatever we have done so far, we created a console application and then we went ahead and set up our build action in the GitHub. And then we created our unit test project with a delete me test. Then we went ahead and said, I need a broker to save a data that's coming in. So in our example, we were using sample as a model entity. And whenever we were receiving the sample as an input, we were saving that record and returning back that record. So that was the responsibility for the storage broker. Now, when we have the sample entity coming in, we wanted to validate certain things. Let's take a real-time example. So we are working on our address entity, and as a user, they have to come in and give our address line 1, line 2, and then PIN code, whatnot. So when a user is coming and providing the data, what if they don't have the address line 1 and we are receiving the request towards us? So what we have to do is we'll have to still validate telling, okay, for my address entity, what I want is I want a value in line 1. Line 2 might be optional. I want a value in country, so on and so forth. So whatever logic that you want to ensure that your data is being propagated to the storage has to be right, then that's the validation that we have to do in the foundation layer. So let's go and say, I'm going to take a copy of it. And what we are going to work on is foundation. This is a service. So anyone who's calling this particular console application to save an address entity, I receive the request. In my foundation service, I'm going to verify if all the data that is required for me to persist the address is good enough or not. Once that is done, I will then go call the storage broker to save the data in my storage. Okay. Now what we're going to do is write the service in a test-driven development. So we're going to have our test written first, and we will fail that test, and then we'll go write our code to ensure the test case is passing. So this is going to be a very interesting series of sessions, and we will just focus on writing our code for setting up the foundation service. Since this is a heavy topic, we will split it up into tiny videos and each has a logical structure to it. So for now, we're going to focus on how to set up the foundation service and then how to set up our test project to call the foundation service. So here, let's say our focus is going to be on unit foundation service, right? So I have my foundation service here in the unit test, which is going to have the code to test the service that is there in the console application. Now our focus is just one unit of work, not worried about what's been in the left hand side for the foundation service, that is who's going to call the foundation service and what if the foundation service is going to call someone else. We're not worried about it. So what we're going to do is use a library to mock. So what we're going to say here is mock storage broker. So we're going to mimic as if we have a broker here, and we're going to tell whenever you have an input call that is happening to this method, just give me back what I'm returning. That's all. So that we have a replica of the storage broker, but it's just going to listen to whatever we are going to code for. And this one, it's being neglected. So that our focus is only on testing this piece and not any other connection that has been established or any other dependency that this foundation service has. Okay, let's go to the code. So here we are in our Visual Studio screen. So just to recap, we already have our broker, which is going to take care of our inserting. And then we have our model for our operation. And then we built our unit test project with a default project. Okay. Now let's get into coding. So my user branch is going to be foundations. So at the business logic layer, we're going to have the verb as add, whereas in the broker, it's going to be insert. I will provide a link in the description, which will help you understand in detail. And my entity name is sample. Okay. Let me minimize all this. Now I need a folder for my services. services. Okay. And what's the service that I'm going to work on is the foundation service. So foundation stands for, that's the basic layer that we want to do for any activity operation that we want to perform. So here, what's the service that I want to use is my sample. That's my entity, right? So samples. Okay. Now we are going to add our first service call. And as usual, we'll start with our interface. So I sample service.cs. Okay. Here, what we are trying to do is, again, we have to establish our contract, what the service is going to do. So if anyone is going to call the method add with an input that it has to add for, so sample, it's taking the namespace. And then after I perform the add activity, what am I going to return? I'm going to return the entity of type sample itself. So let me resolve control and dot is going to give me the option here. Okay. Since this is an interface, we don't have any implementation. We're ending that with a semicolon. So what we're saying is anyone who's going to call the service for the method add sample, whoever is going to parse the entity, that's the value that we're going to save, and I'll be returning that value. Okay. Now let's go with the implementation. I'm going to have my class. So here it's going to be sample service.cs. So we have to say which is the interface that it's going to implement. So it's going to implement I sample service. It has to turn red. So what it says is it does not implement the method add sample. Control and dot. It's going to give you the template for this. Since this is a single line statement, we will scope it out this way. What it's trying to say is this method is a public method. So anyone who is outside this sample service scope who has an object for it can call this method. And then whenever they're calling this method with this input, I'm going to perform some action and return back this as a data type. So here what it is say, throw new not implemented exception. So any piece of code that's not been written, by default, this is the template that it comes out for, which is fine for us now because we're going to do it in a test-driven approach. So now we need some more thing to do. So whenever the sample service is being called, what are the other wirings or dependencies that the service need for it to function? Now let's go back to our diagram. So here, this is our sample service. For sample service to work or to perform the add operation, it receives the data, it performs the validation. Once everything looks good, the next call that has to happen is the storage broker. So this is what we call it as a dependency because the service is doing something and after it performs its activity, it has to send the connection to the next layer. So that's the dependency here. Let's go back to our Visual Studio screen. We're going to say this is going to be a private read-only variable because anyone who has an instance of sample service will have access to this. So read-only, and then we're going to call the storage broker. So this is how we call the interface, storage broker, and my variable for that is going to be storage broker. And now we have to say whenever someone is creating a instance for sample service, they have to have the dependency also passed in. So there's a shortcut that you can do. You can select all this, click on this icon. It gives you generate constructor and it gives you the template, right? So that's what we need. So what it says is this is a constructor method. It's also a method. It's a special method. It gets executed whenever an object is getting initialized. So here it says for my sample service to work, I need storage broker. So that's the dependency. If storage broker is not there, the sample service cannot work by itself. Okay, since this is again a single line, let me do it this way. Okay, all good. So now we have made our skeleton that's required for our sample service. to be initialized when it is being coded for. Okay. As I said, we are going to write our first test. That's going to be our failing test. Don't be disappointed that it's a failing test, but this is going to be a beautiful approach. Let's go to our unit test, and we need to add a folder, services. And then what's the service layer that we are working on? That's foundations. And the next one is what's the entity that we are working on? That is SAM. Okay. Let's add this test itself. So add and a class. Here we don't need an interface because no one is going to call the test. So we say sample service .cs. Okay. Now what we want to say is whenever there's a test getting executed, we want an instance of the actual service so we can call the methods to test it. So what's our service here? That's going to be our sample service. So private read only I sample service, and the variable name is sample service. There's an error. Let's try to resolve. Control and dot. It says generate type, remove, encapsulate, suppress, and all those things. So this is not actually what we want to do. What we want to do is this sample service should refer from the console app. Why is it not getting detected? Let's get to the sample service insert. Here we are. So here, since this is an internal modifier, what it means is the scope of this particular interface or the class is staying within the project itself. So let's go and change it to public, and let's change the actual service class also to public. So now what will happen is the sample service can be detected outside of the project scope if it has a linkage. We'll come there. There are some more errors. It says inconsistent accessibility parameter is less accessible than the method. Okay. What's happening here is you have something called sample service. Internal to that, it's a storage broker. So this is a public access, whereas this particular entity is still what access? Let's verify that. So I'm here at my storage broker. It's internal. So anything that is of public scope and the dependencies should also be in the same scope. So let's go change them public, even this one, because that's their implementation also. The next one is the, yeah, still not happy. So what it says is inconsistent accessibility, return type. So far we have made our contracts and the implementation accessible, but what is the entity itself? What is the scope of the actual entity? Let's go take a look at it. Even here it's internal, public. So now hopefully the errors should be resolved. Yeah, all the errors have gone. Maybe we could have done this at the first check-in itself, making everything public. Then we wouldn't have understood it much better than this way, right? So now just for us to ensure that the service, the methods, the model, the contracts are accessible outside the scope, we have to give public. Anything that doesn't need to be exposed, we can then go with internal. These are the access modifiers. Good. Let's go back to our service. Now let's try the resolution, control and dot. This time it's telling you to do something different. It gave you an option to have it in a using statement. So let's say that. So what it basically did was if you expand the dependencies and if you expand projects, this project example console app is added as a reference here. Okay. Now we have our variable created for the service itself. Now we need to say this is the service that I need to call whenever the test gets executed. For that, the special method, that's the constructor. So the shortcut is CTOR and double tap. It's going to give you the template for the constructor. So here what we're going to say is this sample service is nothing but coming from the class sample service. There's an error. Let's read it. There is no argument given that corresponds to the required formal parameter storage broker. That's right, because in our service, it says whomsoever is going to get a copy of sample service to call the methods, it has to have storage broker wiring, that's the dependency, should be tied up. So here what we need is a storage broker. Remember, we don't want the actual storage broker. We want a mimic of it. We want a fake model of the storage broker. So now we're going to use something interesting. Sorry, read only. And this is going to be a mock. So we're going to just mock the storage broker to something, whatever we are asking it to do. Storage broker, and then storage broker mock. Since this is not an actual entity itself, so suffixing it with mock will help you out. Let's resolve the error here. Control and dot. It is asking you to install a package mock, which is where the library is for using this particular MOCK. The actual package is MOQ. That's also mock. Yeah. So you can go here and try to click on these options, which will install. Find and install is going to just install. Install with package manager is going to open up the package manager console. The other way that you can install is right click the project and say manage NuGet package. Then you need to actually type in the name. So for me, it's easier here. When I say install, it's automatically going to do everything for me and it's going to add the wiring here. Okay, now the error is gone. It's still not there yet. We'll have to pass in that. So we cannot pass the direct object because it's not initialized. We are not telling that what the storage broker mock is going to hold. So we're going to say this storage broker mock is going to hold an instance of what? Of mock I storage broker. This is the syntax of it to initialize the instance for the mocking storage broker. Now, this is what we're going to pass in here. So we say this, and the syntax for you to get the object is this. So you say I storage broker mock and object. You can hover this and read about what it's going to do. Okay, nice. Now all the errors are resolved. We're all good here. One thing that we want to learn here is this sample service is going to take a parameter of name storage broker. But what we are passing actually is something not matching with the parameter name, right? So this is something called parameter aliasing. What we want to do is pass in the actual parameter name storage broker. So this is the parameter name itself. So it's very kind of clear, right? Because we want to write the code and tell the story as if people read the code and then understand what it's going to do. So that's what we are doing here. So this is the wiring. What we have done so far is created our foundation service interface on the add capability. And we went ahead and said the class is going to implement the interface. And then as of now, we have not implemented it. So not implemented exception. And then we said whenever a service, that sample service being called, it needs to have the wiring made for the storage broker. So that's how we defined the variable and we took in the dependency and initialized that using the constructor. Then what we did, we went ahead to the unit test project and started writing our skeletons that we need for any test to work. So what we did here was we wanted a sample service. That's what we are going to test. So we went with sample service. For the sample service to be initialized, we needed a storage broker. And our scope of testing was just on the sample service, not on the broker. So we went ahead and leveraged the library, mock library, to create a fake storage broker for us. With that, we were able to complete our wiring that is required for our testing. So this is the setup that is required for our test. In the next video, we will write the actual failing test. See you all then.